Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we're having a very special guest today, a poet, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. His name is Franz Wright. He's here to talk about his latest collection called God's Silence, and it's published by Alfred Knopf, and we appreciate you coming by.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
You know, you won the Pulitzer Prize in either 2003 or 2004.
2004. The book came out in 2003.
That's for 3, and the prize was for 4. And that was a book called Walking in Martha's Vineyard.
Walking to Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard is an island off the coast of Massachusetts.
Right. Now, your father also won the Pulitzer.
Yes, 1972.
That, I understand that's nothing like that has ever happened before.
I think it's the only time.
And it may never happen again.
Let's hope not.
You know, I didn't really have any idea where to start, because when I was reading the book, I was kind of, I guess the word was either overcome or so taken by the experience that I didn't know, where to grab hold. But you did an interview not too long ago with poets and writers. And in one of those, in one part of that interview, you say that poetry hit you like a lightning bolt, and that experience was such a heady sensation of ecstasy that I forever afterwards needed it. So you're compelled to be a poet.
Well, yes, nothing for me approaches the sensation of writing well.
Mm-hmm. And you announced to your father that you were a poet. And
I sent him my first poem, I think.
And he said, something like this, "I'll be damned, you're a poet. Welcome to hell."
Yes, he did. I think I have the letter somewhere.
That's what we call the downside.
Yeah.
The you felt that I don't ever get the sense in what you said in the interview that you felt you were in competition with your father, but rather that he was very supportive.
Well, I've always been very proud of the fact that I'm James Wright's son. I know I never felt it as a competition, and it astounds me when people mention us in the same breath. I have a great reverence for him and his work.
One of the things that's not as easy as one would think is to define poetry. At one point you've said poetry paradoxically uses words to embody something that cannot be said. I want to have it both ways. I want to be simple and clear and colloquial, and yet incantory and magical, all at the same time.
I think for me, poetry has always meant a return to some sort of original state of awe, as in childhood maybe, which is very hard sometimes to maintain as an adult. And I think that's the sensation it gives me reading it, working on it.
In one of the poems in the book called Poet's Room in a Museum, you go on a little bit more, and I'll read from that. Lastly, poem should always be completely clear, completely concrete, and completely inexplicable, like reality itself. Poem's purpose is to transcend words, to transcend mere words, by pointing to reality, encountering and contributing to reality, and finally joining it, just as our purpose is to finally die, entering earth, water, or fire, to rejoin what has heretofore only been perceived, enjoyed, suffered. It will, if successful, poetry, allow one who possesses a gift for gazing with stillness and emptiness into it to pass, for a moment, into the eternal future and origin, no longer in the world, but an inseparable element of it, and so forth.
How articulate I am sometimes.
Well, that's beautiful. And I think that, it helped me as I was reading the book to get some notion of how you can possibly define this elusive business.
René Char, the great French poet, called poetry a contribution of the creature to the creation. And that's what I was thinking about, I think.
I see. But you're also, it seems to me, thinking there about some kind of relationship to the divine.
Yes.
Either through the writing and or the perception.
I think I was just trying to get away from the idea that poetry is a literary artifact. I don't think of it as literature. I think of it as a quest for a heightened state of perception.
There's a poem called The Heaven. I lived as a monster. My only hope is to die like a child. In the otherwise vacant and seemingly ceilingless vastness of a snow-lit Boston church, a voice said, I can do that. If you ask me, I will do it for you. Probably written in relation to a low point in your life. We are going to come back and get away from theory and enjoy and share some of the poems in God's silence. And we'll do that in a minute or so.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Our guest today, poet Franz Wright, talking about his new collection of poems called God's Silence, published by Alfred Knopf, about which Publishers Weekly has said in part, Wright's Walking to Martha's Vineyard won the 2004 Pulitzer Prize, and this book offers more agonic short poems on struggles with addiction and pain, but from a perspective much closer to faith than despair. The best poems offer hope and compassion and embrace the contradictions they present. Proved faithless, still I wait. And that's the poet's words. So there you are, off and running from Publishers Weekly, and they say there that indicate or suggest that many of the poems are serious. But one of my favorite poems is not so serious, perhaps winsome, and it's called On the Death of a Cat. In life, death was nothing to you. I am willing to wager my soul that it simply never occurred to your nightmareless mind, while sleep was everything. See it raised to an infinite power and perfection. No death in you then, so now how even less. Dear stealth of innocence. What a lovely description of a cat. Licked, polished to an evil luster, little milk fang, whiskered night friend, go. I love it.
Thank you.
I love it. That stealth part is so perfect.
Thank you very much. It was in the New Yorker not too long ago.
Oh, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Now, another one that I thought was playful has an interesting title, A Successful Day, fill in the blank.
Mm.
Whatever possessed you? I mean, it works out in the poem that there was a good reason for that, but did you wake up early one morning and had a difficulty with a title?
I don't know. Probably the title was suggested by the poem in this case.
Yeah. It has been given back, all I was denied, and all I then took over denying myself for more than 30 years, a cheerful, self-confident trust that I am at home in this universe, and pity for the afflicted, because as one of the afflicted, I could pity and identify with no one but myself. I would like to give my life the sad and awful simplicity of an early weekday mass with a handful of most lonely humans in attendance. And if you've ever gone to weekly daily mass in a Catholic church, that's a very apt description, lonely humans in attendance. What have I ever gained by 1, answering the telephone, 2, reading the newspaper, 3, fill in the blank? That's a participatory kind of.
Right, you can write it right in the book.
Right in there, reading the sports page or something like that. This morning, I had supper with the infinite. Dorothy Wordsworth wrote, "A rainy day, I made a shoe." And again, it's light and serious all at the same time. And that's, I think, what I like best about most of the poems, where you're able to combine seriousness and fun.
Well, I want there to be a certain conversation going on with the reader, maybe. Whatever that reader is, that invisible reader.
Well, you got me started.
Good. That's one extra book sold for me.
There's a long poem that opens the collection, God's Silence. It's called East Boston, 1996. East Boston, is that where you live or near?
Well, I lived there at a particularly low point in my life, living in Boston. It's kind of a rough area of the city.
Uh-huh. Now, one of the poems within that larger poem I'd like you to read for us. It's called Solitary Day, Minnesota, 1961.
Sure.
A poem that you said off air everybody is choosing.
Well, this poem is a kind of mosaic of memories from different parts of my life, and this one deals with an experience I had as a child. In a clearing in the corn stalks in light November snow, it was suggested that I fire on that muttering family of crows. I complied and watched as those big ruffled shadows rose from the ground, scattered and vanished in the direction of barren border trees, commencing to speak all at once in hysterical tongues, all except for one, deceased. I turned it over with my boot. The eyes stared at the sky, the minute snowflakes falling into them. Its beak was partly opened. It was then I vomited a little. This achievement was the last thing I'd expected when they dug up the old .22 for my afternoon's amusement and banishment. I was just 8, but I swore then and there my career as death was finished. The ground was hard, but I considered going back to the house for a shovel. It did not seem wholly implausible that I might turn around to find my victim limping after me, and I ended up walking away from the house for an hour or so. Later on, I cried and told my mother. She comforted me, as I knew perfectly well she would. In her opinion, I was not to blame. It was that gun. And besides, she was certain crows had their own heaven. I was off the hook. My crow was much better off now. That's what she thought.
Good for Bob. We have a few more minutes to spend with Franz Wright, and when we do that, we'll talk a little bit about the future.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Franz Wright is the guest. God's Silence, a collection of poems, is the book. And Peter Thorpe of a place called the Rocky Mountain News said that he writes an understated, almost cryptic kind of verse which nonetheless has a lot to say. Wright is always a poet of energetic self-doubts and artistic contradictions, and that's what makes him fun to read. And I've never heard any poet called fun to read.
Oh, well,
that's very nice, I think.
Compliment.
I like that. One of the things is you're working on another collection, and you're having trouble getting started, which sounds like every writer's complaint. But in the meantime, so to speak, you're doing some other wonderful things. You, for a good long time, worked with people who were mentally ill.
Yes.
And helped them?
Well, people who suffer from mental illness and drug addiction, both at the same time.
And you're still continuing to work with another place called the Children's Room.
Yeah, it's called the Center for Grieving Children in Arlington, Massachusetts. Children who have gone through the death of a parent recently.
What do you do with them?
Well, the kids, I work with 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. They have 3-year-olds through teenagers, and we get together with them, and they're in a peer kind of situation where the other kids have all had the same experience, of course, and they have opportunities to talk about what they're going through, and then they have opportunities to draw and so forth and play and raise hell, and
I like the raise hell part about it. They probably like that too.
Yeah, it's fun. They have a good time.
One of the things I wanted to ask, and this is not a nice question, I don't think, but I'll ask it anyway. You write a poem and another poem and so forth and so on, and when do you decide to do a collection, or does Alfred Knopf decide that?
That is a good question. I think I become aware of it at a certain point, the same way that I become aware that an individual poem is approaching completion. You just have a sense of the wholeness of the book as if it were one sort of work, and you find a way to get the poems to conform to a certain shape that you have in mind, and you get rid of the ones that don't.
Save them for another collection, maybe?
Yeah, sometimes.
That's interesting. The one of the poems that I liked a lot was one called "The Walk," and the part that I liked is where you're saying, "For the last time I stumbled into a church where no one was home, silently screaming, 'Help me! I can't live without you. I don't want to live.' Staggered out again, took a look around, and suddenly noticed the others each wearing that identical expression. What is wrong with me? What's going to happen to me?" And I tried again, I heard again the faceless voice saying, "How can you expect energy from above when you continue to receive it from below, and are content?" And the reply is, "I am not content."
Mm-hmm.
That must have been a heck of a moment.
Well, I don't know. It's a little melodramatic, maybe, but that's the way I feel sometimes.
And in a poem called "God Here," you talk about the uninterruptible voice, the silence I now call my only friend, who says, "Right about now, you might want to stop playing mad chemist with your brain. Return to me, and I will return." That's a plea from on high, I guess.
A way of getting energy from a better source than certain substances or chemicals.
When you do a collection like this, is there anyone that sticks out in your mind before, during, and after as your personal favorite?
Oh, I don't know. There are a lot of poets I admire very much. That's a hard one to answer.
You do have also, I don't want to say a poet's respect because I'm no expert in this field, obviously, but you seem to have a great respect for the silences.
Yeah. And I also am very interested in the formal side of poetry and the musical side of it as well.
Yeah, somewhere you said that you feel the beat, you feel the meter.
Yeah, I often do. And I think Robert Frost said something about feeling rhythms and beats physically in his body before he found the words to fit them. And I have that experience too sometimes.
Spending time with us today, Franz Wright, a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, talking about his new book, God's Silence. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.